Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as you do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts and other stuff they're involved in. My guest today has a bachelor's degree from Penn State and a law degree from the University of Denver. Also earned a master's degree specializing in Russian and Soviet studies from the University of Colorado, which included completion of the Russian Culture and Language program from St. Petersburg State University in Russia. Also holds a Ph.D. in Middle East Studies from King's College in London. Over the years, he's won numerous state and regional weightlifting meets, plus he competed in 7 National Weightlifting Championships. He spent more than 25 years traveling to the Soviet Union. This included training with several Russian special operations units. Through that, he became a certified Russian hand-to-hand combat instructor and was awarded a black belt in Russian SAMBO. Also holds black belts in Japanese Jyo-Ryo Kenpo karate and a military special operations karate system. In 2007, was inducted into the USA Martial Arts International Hall of Fame, is the author of multiple books, including his most recent 1,500 Years of Fighting, the complete book of Russian, Ukrainian, and Soviet martial arts, from Cossacks to Spetsnaz and beyond. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. John Giduck. How you doing today, sir?
Doing well. And yourself, sir?
I'm doing good. I truly appreciate this. I know we've been emailing back and forth for a few months. I think originally you were recommended to me from Dan Millman. Definitely thank you to Dan for that. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
I've been looking forward to this for quite some time.
Well, what we do with all my guests is I want to, I mentioned, martial arts background, but I want to know where it started. I want to go back to the beginning and find out where that first interest in martial arts came from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey.
All right. Well, not to bore you and your listeners, but the decades-long university professor in me always feels compelled to define terms first.
Okay.
So one of the first things that I would give consideration to is, how are you defining martial arts? When I look at it, I think of it in a very, very broad, full spectrum term, which really includes all combative sports,
Yep.
even things like wresling, boxing.
Absolutely.
So if we can expand
Fencing,
it to that degree, well, yeah, I'm no fencer, that's for sure. So that's not a concern, but that would definitely be something that I would include if I had any background in that whatsoever. I spent the very early part of my life as a military brat, and my father was a boxer in the military. So certainly my older brother and I grew up being trained in basic rudimentary boxing skills. So maybe all that goes back to age 3, 4, or 5. My brother and I were always fighting, and he, of course, was winning.
Okay.
And I wrestled for a number of years in junior high school, as it was called way back when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
junior high school and high school. So that was really the beginning of any sort of exposure to what I would think of as martial-based sports or disciplines.
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that because, like I said, I've asked that to many guests and they'll talk about, their first experience with like karate or taekwondo or something. And then, half hour later, as we're chatting, they'll be like, yeah, but, I wrestled when I was like 4. I'm like, well, why didn't you mention that when I first asked about it? So yeah, I definitely include that. So I'm definitely glad you brought that up. So then after high school, what was next? When did you get involved in another type of combative sports, combative arts?
As you mentioned in your very generous introduction, I had stumbled into Olympic style weightlifting as a teenager when I was 16. And that's really when I stopped wrestling. I found out I was a much better lifter than I was a wrestler. Not that I was ever a great competitive weightlifter. And I was on Penn State's weightlifting team, and we were a repeat national championship team. But I had torn some muscles in my hip after the National Collegiate Championships my junior year, which would have been 1980, to give people some idea of just how old I am. And I had a neighbor in the apartments I lived in at Penn State who was on the Penn State Kung Fu team
Oh,
that,
nice.
interestingly enough, was run by the Sifu was Nick Grayson, and that's Gracen, in case anybody wants to look him up, who would go on to be, he was introduced I saw him on TV once many years later, introduced as the most highly decorated non-Asian Kung Fu champion ever. So I had tremendous training and all that Kung Fu work and the extreme spectrum ranges of feet, hands, body, and all the stretching they do. The stretching is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Was really good and definitely helped me rehab, but I was never able to return to competition my senior year and really kept up with my Kung Fu training. After college, I moved to Denver and went to law school at the University of Denver and continued on really with my Kung Fu training. And after another year or so, really found that my hip had been largely rehabbed without ever going to a doctor or a physical therapist, and got back into lifting. But that was the first introduction for me to Asian martial arts and Asian systems.
So a little off topic, but with the weightlifting, did you ever get involved in the powerlifting aspect?
I was not a power lifter.
Okay. I just asked that because there's someone from my hometown, I guess, I never followed it, but he was a famous power lifter. So if you were into that.
Do you remember his name?
Brad Gillingham.
Ooh, I don't know that. I've known as a competitive weightlifter, the Olympic lifters and the power lifters, they tend to kind of be lumped together, and you know one another, and you all train on the same platform with the same heavy weights in the gym, and we tend to be shunted off by the bodybuilders and the more recreational trainers. He is not one I know, but I've known a large number of very, very top level powerlifters. I always lacked just the sheer raw strength that they have.
Yeah.
And I was much better at moving somewhat lighter weights. Of course, they don't do anything overhead. Somewhat lighter weights, much faster because everything's fast twitch muscle fiber with Olympic style weightlifting, which also had a great transference to martial arts training going forward in my life.
Yeah. He was older than me, so I didn't really know him. I think he might have graduated with my sister, but I know his dad was a former NFL player and like won 2 Super Bowls with the Green Bay Packers, but I'm also not a football fan. So I met his dad once in my life, but figured I'd throw the name out there and see if it sounded familiar. So then this Kung Fu instructor you met, how long did that relationship last? How long did you train with him? What are some things you remember about that?
Well, I only trained with him for the 1 year at Penn State, but I was really, really serious and took all of my focus on weightlifting and really put it into Kung Fu. So he was very generous, notwithstanding the fact that he probably recognized I didn't have a body really well suited for Northern Shaolin long fist Kung Fu. Definitely shorter, stockier, thicker build. But he allowed me to start training with him when he did his personal private training, which usually occurred at about 4:00 in the morning. We would go to Penn State's rec hall and we would train for 2 to 3 hours before I would stumble off to classes. Nick had graduated by then and he had just hung on there for a bit to keep running the Kung Fu program. So I got double or triple really the focused instruction and experience in 1 year, and then kept in touch with Nick and continue to keep in touch with him. And even in the book 1500 Years of Fighting, I talk about him a good deal. I've got some photos of him because I talk about really the synergism, if you will, between the Slavic martial arts going back many, many years and the development and evolution of what I'll just generally call Kung Fu in China. And of course, they've got an enormous shared border, and there was a lot of cross-border, cross-cultural pollination to include with martial arts. So Nick is definitely integrated into all that in the book. But I then, when I was in law school, returned to the weightlifting platform. And aside from really trying to continue my Kung Fu stretching, which I found to be so great, I ended up abandoning martial arts for at least a while before I drifted back into them.
And so was that a conscious decision to abandon martial arts, or was it just, you didn't have time because of work, or just there wasn't a school near you wanted to train at? Kind of what led to that decision?
I did look for kung fu schools in the Denver area, and I really didn't find one back then that I thought came even close, and I'm not denigrating anybody or any
Yeah.
school, but came even close to the level of instruction that I got
Yeah.
from Nick. The other thing was I was in law school full time. I started as a 4-year night student and I graduated in 2 years and 12 weeks. So
Wow.
I was taking overload courses. I was working full time at a law firm. And I was also virtually lifting full time. I qualified for the team to even be a resident athlete at the Olympic Training Center down in Colorado Springs, which I
Hmm.
couldn't do because of work and school. But I, even through all that, I was running on 90 minutes at most 2 hours of sleep a day,
Wow.
7 days a week. And there was really just no way to squeeze anything else in.
Man, that's crazy. So how long did that break last?
I got as far as spring of 2000. I'm sorry, God, I'm skipping decades on you.
No.
1984.
Okay.
I won the U.S. Open weightlifting championships. Tried to make the Olympic team there in
Wow.
1984 in LA and failed to do that. Competed again in the American weightlifting championships that fall, then again the following year. But by then, I was working as a trial attorney,
Oh,
80
wow.
plus hours a week at
Hmm.
a very intense litigation firm. And I really wasn't even hardly lifting. I trained for a couple months before a major meet, show up, not do all that well. And it was really after 1985 that I abandoned competitive lifting and was really just trying to survive an intense litigation practice as
Yeah.
a young attorney, and really didn't pick up martial arts again until I started traveling to the Soviet Union
Oh,
and then
wow.
Russia.
Okay. Crazy. And when you started traveling, was it something you were consciously maybe thinking of, or did it just like, hey, here's this thing we want you to train in Sambo or something like that? How did that kind of happen?
It was a really strange confluence of factors. My family was from Ukraine and Poland, and no one had been back since 1914 when they came to the US, but I had always had an interest in seeing that part of the world. And in 1990, I think it was maybe 89, 90, the American Bar Association, with Gorbachev in power then in the Soviet Union,
Hmm.
and with Perestroika and Glasnost, his new programs of openness and restructuring, the Soviet Union for the first time was looking at doing business with Western nations. And the US really had no program, no system for actually doing trade, didn't really even have any sort of program for the exchange of money. The Soviet Union decided for itself when people would go there what an exchange rate was, which was ridiculous, ridiculously generous to themselves. And so the American Bar Association was looking to put together a group of attorneys to go over there and have meetings with their counterparts in the Kremlin and with some top government officials. We had the opportunity to meet Gorbachev, for instance, and George Shultz, former Secretary of State under Reagan, was there. So just wanting to see that part of the world, and especially having grown up during the Cold War, I took advantage of it and applied and went and found that I really liked it. I could stumble through the language decently. I wasn't certainly fluent by any means, but one of the things that helped was that having grown up in my family, I could largely speak Russian accentlessly, or at least I didn't sound like some sort of tourist
Hmm.
who couldn't hardly say anything. And knowing the Russian people and how they are, they reacted very positively to that. And I have a very, very traditional Ukrainian last name. So found I liked it, made some friends, went back, and then started my master's program in Soviet Russian Slavic studies and politics, all that, and did a good bit of it at St. Petersburg State University and just loved my time there. And that was really where I started my martial arts training. I had friends or people, at least I knew, who were on the wrestling teams at the Olympic Training Center. And most Olympic weightlifters, Olympic style weightlifters, are all former wrestlers anyway. So the wrestlers and the lifters would tend to spend time together. And they always said, if you ever get the chance, get somebody to teach you Sambo over there, because it is one of the toughest, baddest things going. And so at one point, I looked into that and ended up with some instructors who really pretty much beat the ever living crap out of me. Um, but I kept going back, and my training in different Russian systems never stopped after that.
That's cool. So what do you think it was, once you got your taste of that, what made you said you kept going, never stopped. What made you, what was it about those styles, those systems that made you want to keep coming back?
Part of it was the training that I really got indoctrinated into, because it wasn't pure Sambo and it wasn't pure Sistema. You're probably familiar with Sistema, and it wasn't pure Rukopashny boy, which is the actual real original hard form hand-to-hand combat system of the Russian peasantry and the Cossacks, which as it evolved became more fluid, relaxed, which gave us what people think of as Sistema today. What I was getting trained in by these three really young, super fit, tough guys, who I only learned later were Spetsnaz, Russian Special Forces hand-to-hand combat instructors, was really an agglomeration of all three systems.
Okay.
So I was getting introduced into a little bit of everything, and I really liked it. I had been around and played around with friends who did karate, and obviously had some background in kung fu, that I realized that this really has some unique aspects to it and some advantages to it that the others don't. For instance, just grappling. A lot of karate and kung fu systems are in no way designed to deal with some top level wrestler shooting their legs from 12 feet out,
Right.
coming in under strikes, or even if they throw their leg up in the air, the leg that's holding them up is just going to be folded in half and they're going to be put on the ground. And the submissions that go along with it, the harder form, high level boxing skills that comes with pure Sambo that Sistema lacks, the incredible power delivery of open hand striking that Sistema really has developed to an impressive degree. And all of that put together, I think, just kind of left me with a wow factor. And probably examining myself psychologically, I was a little imbued with the notion that all of this came from my own heritage. And so I, much like my master's degree studies, this really just became part of it. And I really was interested in continuing on with it and learning as much as I could.
Wow. That is cool. That's really cool. So at any time, during your martial arts career, I know with your background, you did, some wrestling, you did some boxing, you did some kung fu and everything else. Did you ever get involved in the competition side of martial arts?
Absolutely never did.
Never. Okay.
I have no, sir. Never fought in competition. And to be honest with you, I can't say I really ever had a desire to fight in competition. I've got a now 16-year-old son who's got a couple black belts, and he's trained in the Russian system since he was 2.
Wow.
He's also trained. I put him in a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school and a taekwondo school. So he's a pretty well-rounded guy, and never encouraged him, certainly, and definitely didn't try to force him to ever think about competing. And when he was 8 years old, he just said one day, "I want to go fight in a tournament." I said, okay, if that's what you want. And he'd never broken a board before in his life, because that kind of stuff really isn't part of the Russian approach to training.
Right. Yep.
And he went and he did it, and he walked away with a gold medal, and he acquitted himself well. And he just said, okay, that was good. I enjoyed it, but he's never looked to compete again.
Wow.
But at least he can say he did it.
Yeah.
I could never say I have fought in a competitive arena.
Yeah. But I mean, you did martial arts. I mean, you did wrestling tournaments. So that's,
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty dang close to like a jiu-jitsu type tournament.
Yeah. Yes. Arguably, it is close to something like
So I mean,
jiu-jitsu.
you've done combative competition, just not traditional martial arts competition. So
Arguably, but
yeah,
I never try to be too generous to myself. It's not like somebody was punching me in the face.
yeah,
So, I've got a lot of friends who are top level competitors. One of the early students at my Russian martial arts school here that I had opened so many years ago, he was an international full contact bare knuckle karate champion. He was 16 years old. He was from some little ranch and farm town in northeastern Colorado. And at age 16, told his parents, I want to go live in Japan and train karate there.
wow,
And they let him go. And
wow,
he's fought all over the place. He's won tournaments and championships. A lot of other martial artists who ended up at my Russian school, almost all of whom had black belts and other things, they all arrived and had the same reaction to the Russian approach to things. They would all say, the things that have always frustrated me about my system, whatever it was, it's like a breath of fresh air with the Russians, because they look at it and say, no, that doesn't make sense. Or if you don't like doing this, don't do it. It's obviously not natural for you. And there's all kinds of other skills and techniques you can develop to deal with things. Compared to the structured orthodoxy of the Asian approach to martial arts, the Russians they're very laissez-faire. And people responded well to it. But I've been around a great number of Asian martial art tournament champions, and they've got my profound respect. But I just never had the itch to go enter a tournament.
Yeah, and I'm the same. I've 42 years. I've been in one tournament in my life, and I only went because my instructor at the time forced me to. Otherwise, I probably never would have. Same thing. I've never had an interest. I've trained other people for tournaments and competitions. I've judged and refed and stuff, but I've never had an interest of doing it myself. So I completely get it.
Yeah, I've even worked the corners of people.
Yep, I've done that too. Yep, that's cool. What about the Japanese Jiu-Ryu Kenpo karate? When did that come about?
Well, that actually came about as I would go to Russia and I would spend weeks, sometimes a couple months at a time over there, sometimes as part of my master's degree studies. After a while, I started leading other student groups to Russia through the University of Colorado at Denver, and sort of hosting, chaperoning, setting up short study abroad semesters for them. So I would live in the dormitories with them and make sure they all were safe and behaved themselves and didn't do anything stupid, because you can do something really knuckleheaded here in America as a 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old, and it's of no great consequence. But in Russia, especially in those days, because this is immediately after the Soviet Union has collapsed, the new Russian Federation is in the complete doldrums. I'm not even sure it was a third world country. Could have called it a fourth world country. Police were highly corrupt. Organized crime, street gangs were rampant and everywhere. And my job was to make sure these students, they got to see a lot of things. They got to go to school, and I made sure they would stay safe. So like I hired a couple friends who were former Soviet airborne guys. They were the ones always driving them around in vans. So as part of all that, I would continue my training. And when I wasn't doing that, and even when I was done with my own studies, I would still go back and train. And by a certain point, I had encountered Vladimir Vasiliev from Canada, who is the poster boy for Sistema, certainly in the West. And I was doing more and more training with people he knew, Colonel Mikhail Ryabko in Moscow. And so I'd go to Moscow more and more, less and less St. Petersburg, and continue on with my training. And again, I'd be there weeks. Sometimes I'd be there a couple months at a time. And I would come back home and look for volunteers, friends I knew because I wanted to continue to train and I needed the practice. So I had a couple friends that I talked into working out with me. And the advantage to them was they got to learn the stuff I was learning. The advantage to me was I'd come home, I'd have people to continue to practice with, which would make me better, having to answer their questions. And when they would inquire, all right, well, what about this situation? How would the Russians handle this or that? It forced me to intellectually process things beyond what people do when all they really do is they go to class, they do what the instructor says, they walk home, and they really don't think about it beyond that.
Hmm.
When you're forced to take on a pseudo instructor role, it really makes you think hard about everything, take the principles that you've been taught and apply them to different circumstances. And then I would get to go back to Russia and say, okay, last time I was here, you taught me this and this. In this particular situation, is this what I would do? And most of the time, the answer was something really gentle and poignant, like, of course, you're not an idiot. Did you really have to ask that question? But at least I would get confirmation and it would give me confidence to continue on from there. So my training just kept going on and on. I would travel up to Canada to train with Vasiliev. I would make the effort to go to some of his seminars that he would hold here in the US. And then I started bringing like Vasiliev and some of the other really top people in Russia that I met, even outside of Vasiliev's immediate circle. I would start bringing them here to the US and hosting seminars for them. And it just kind of took on a life of its own.
Very cool. At what point in that, martial arts journey did teaching become something that interested you and actually teaching other people martial arts?
It really was not something that I had seriously contemplated. Back in those days, and we're talking again the early 90s, the Russian organized crime, and keep in mind, I'm going to deviate here a bit.
Hmm.
My master's thesis was on Russian organized crime and its impact on US business in Russia. And so, as part of that, through contacts, I had a lot of all this, including the first instructors I ever had in hand-to-hand combat there in St. Petersburg, came about because I got to know a man who was the head of the KGB for the St. Petersburg region, St. Petersburg Oblast. In fact, Putin's boss way back then, because Putin came out of the KGB St. Petersburg office. So his wife, I'm sure this was no coincidence, his wife was the head of the foreign studies division at St. Petersburg State University. No big surprise. And he came to pick her up from school one day. And it was really interesting to watch because we're all up on the second floor of what's called the Smolny Institute. And all of the Russians there who know who this guy is, the students, the university, they're all there peering through the windows, watching this man come up the walk. And the moment he hits the door downstairs, they vanish. They're just gone.
Okay.
And, Brian, I'm sure you've been around enough that you probably experienced this. Americans have this weird thing about them that when they travel overseas, they walk around like they're in a bulletproof cocoon. Nothing bad can ever happen to them.
Yeah.
Kind of that I'm on vacation mentality, so only good things can happen to me. And being pretty typically American, I thought, well, I'm not going to run away and I'm not going to miss an opportunity to meet this guy.
Hmm.
How fascinating. And his wife introduced us and we sat down and talked, and he came back the next day and we went down in the cafeteria, the canteen, and we had coffee. And it was kind of interesting because there were students learning English and they're sitting there at tables around trying to puzzle out how to pronounce different things. And I'm sure he's a guy who did some really pretty harsh things in his life, but he was always wonderful to me. And he would actually get up and walk over to the students and tell them how to say things. And he was a fluent English speaker, obviously. But like all Russians, he had learned British English. And so I would correct and say, no, that's only the way the Brits talk, and they're really not relevant to anything.
Hmm.
Here's the way Americans say it. And we would laugh and joke, and then we would get together in evenings, and, we'd get well into our cups of vodka. And at a certain point one night, I had said to him, broach the subject. I've always heard Russian Sambo is, forgive me, kick ass. And is there any way you could help me get some training? I'd like to learn this. So he came back a day or two later to the university and he said, tomorrow at the end of classes, go get on the subway, the metro, go to this station, change trains at this station, go up to the platform, and you'll be met. And I did that, and it's Chas peak, rush hour, peak hour, as the
Okay.
Russians call it. And I'm standing up there in this just throng of people, and this tough, you know how the toughest guys in the world are those middleweight class guys? I don't care if it's wrestling, boxing, martial arts, MMA. They're like these lean, tough guys, 165 to maybe 180 pounds. Well, one of those guys came out of the crowd with this gulag haircut, looked at me, just crooked his finger at me, and off we went. And he had taken me through the bowels of St. Petersburg in an area I had never been. And we went into this building that looked like it was condemned with a hard old varnished floor that hadn't been polished or treated probably since Stalin was an adolescent, and two of his comrades were waiting, and that's where I proceeded to get my introduction to all of that. So that's a long way around the block to answer your question. all of this really just continued on. I kept going to Russia. I kept meeting more and more people. At a certain point, I got to befriend some top level Russian Spetsnaz special forces commanders, and I would be given the opportunity to go live on a Russian Spetsnaz base with them and train with them. And then after a time, I think they developed a comfort with me. I was given the opportunity to start bringing over small groups, and mostly it was American law enforcement, a couple Green Berets, that kind of crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And we would all just live there in the barracks and train hard with those guys. Everything. It was everything. We even learned how to drive tracked armored personnel carriers,
Wow.
wheeled armored personnel carriers. Shoot, and you learn that the Russians really do not shoot well. Certainly not compared to American standards.
Yeah.
But did some underwater hand-to-hand combat training with the Russian Naval Commandos, a group they call the PDSS, which is what they call anti-SEAL teams. Again, the more people you got to know, the more familiar and comfortable they became with you, and the more they were willing to open things up to training with other people. They liked bringing Israelis in because they really felt that only really Israelis understood the constant terror attacks that they, as Russians in Russia, were facing. And of course, this was all in the middle of the Chechen wars as well. So
wow.
I don't know. Looking back on it all just seems to have been like a snowball rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now I'm old and look back on it all and wonder how in the world did all that happen.
Right. So what made you decide to open your own school?
Oh, okay. You have to forgive me. My CTE brain definitely has its sidetrack problems.
No problem.
So at a certain point, my master's degree being on Russian organized crime, and I had been working with the anti-organized crime units of the St. Petersburg and Moscow police departments. It had gotten passed around to some different groups, and I had been contacted by the FBI to help them with some of these issues, because this is at a time where Russian organized crime was exploding in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going into 1995 now, 1996, 97. And the FBI created 8 special just Russian organized crime units in different offices, district offices around the nation where it was most prevalent. And Denver, interestingly, had the top 3 Russian organized crime leaders living right in the same block of each other.
Wow.
On this little cul-de-sac of mansions. In fact, the top guy by the name of Ivan Kov, went by the organized crime name of Yaponchik, which meant little Jap. Vyacheslav Ivankov, he was arrested. He was actually arrested in New York City, which was the headquarters of most Russian organized crime, but they had groups all over, and he had been sent here to get them all under control because they were murdering each other and fighting out in streets in America in these cities as much as they were in Russia. So at a certain point, the FBI was having training they were putting on for state and local law enforcement, and they asked me to come speak to it. So I gave a presentation to all these cops. And at the end of it, part of my presentation was you need to understand that the enforcers for these organizzatia, these mafia, I spell it as Mafia,
Okay.
to distinguish it from the Italian mafia name. Their enforcers, their bodyguards, their protectors, their muscle, these are all former Spetsnaz guys. And these Spetsnaz guys are tough. They are extraordinarily well trained. And the training they have is completely different from what your defensive tactics have prepared you for. And I said, quite honestly, there's nothing you've been trained. I don't care which of you guys have black belts that's going to allow you to deal with these guys. And I just did a short demo showing them a few of the things that are part of the Russian hand-to-hand systems that would really neutralize anything that the cops were used to doing traditionally. So after that, I got contacted by a few of the police officers, mostly SWAT guys, who had been there, and they asked me if I would put on a program for them, something more intense, longer, because they really liked it and they wanted to know what this could be coming at them, but they also wanted to learn it because they could see the effectiveness of it. So I went to Sheldon Marr. I don't know if you're familiar with Sheldon. Sheldon was on the judo team, the judo residence team down at the Olympic Training Center. Top level, obviously, judo champion. And he had opened up a jiu-jitsu school called Grappler's Edge.
Oh, yeah.
Way east of Denver on Colfax Avenue. Couldn't be a worse street, couldn't be a worse part of the city back then. And Sheldon was producing repeat national jiu-jitsu championship teams. So Sheldon's school really only ran 3 nights a week. So I talked to him and he said, yeah, you can have my place. And so I think we ran 2 nights a week for 8 weeks. We'd run about 3 hours a night.
Wow.
And I probably had 30, 40 cops there. And, they earned their stripes
That's cool.
in almost a literal fashion because we trained hard. And it was only because of that I started teaching anything other than my couple friends in my basement. And after it was all over, they would start bringing other people and say, can we continue on? So we would continue on out there. And this is back at a time where my whole life was way west Denver. And this is way east Denver.
Okay.
And the group started growing and growing. And I think Sheldon needed his extra days in his club. So I opened up a school.
Just kind of by necessity.
It really kind of was driven to that. And I made sure that what I charged was going to at least cover expenses, rent, all that, and maybe a little extra money, most of which we spent to keep the refrigerator stocked with vodka and beer for everybody, being a Russian tradition.
Nice. That's cool. And how long did that stay open for?
7 years.
Okay.
And at that point, I was traveling so much. I reached a point where I was on the road 45 weeks a year, 5 to 6 days a week. A lot of it was just traveling domestically, doing counterterrorism training and presentations, seminars, speaking at law enforcement association organizations. Some of it was military work. We were training the 10th Special Forces Group, the Green Berets, down at Fort Carson in Russian hand-to-hand combat and close quarters combat firearms. I can say that I did some stuff with the Delta Force over a period of time, and that's about all I can say. But I was just on the road too much, and I had a lot of my senior students were trying to fill in, and it really it wasn't workable.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
Ultimately, I just shut it down.
All right. So what led to the interest in writing? And talk about kind of how you got into writing and your first book, in your newest book.
This is another thing that I kind of stumbled backwards into. So I don't know if you're familiar with it or how many of your listeners are. In September of 2004, Chechen terrorists, Islamist terrorists, took over what in Russia is called a middle school But in Russia, middle school is a combined grade school.
Yeah.
It's grades 1 through 11, and it's after 11th grade Russians graduate from high school. So down in the town of Beslan, and we would think of it as a state of North Ossetia, they rolled in on the first morning of school, September 1, 2004, and they took over the entire school. They took 1,217 hostages. There were 49 terrorists barricading themselves in explosive booby traps everywhere. And that started a 3-day mass hostage siege. By that point, I'd been doing so many other things. And in all honesty, I'd gotten tired of practice of law. The law is a tough way to make a living. So no matter what else people say about attorneys, especially trial lawyers, they live a tough life.
Yeah.
It is an incredibly high stress life. And they work unbelievable hours, and they have no control over their own lives. They rarely make it to a vacation because a judge will schedule some hearing at the last minute. And even if they left, they have to jump on a plane to come home. It is a hard life. And I was looking for something different. And I had a group of people whom I had met by then. And they were forming a nonprofit. This is now immediately after 9/11. They're forming a nonprofit counterterrorism training and consulting organization that was called Archangel. And the original creators, board members, the founding director was a man named Drew Dix, who was a Green Beret who had the Medal of Honor from Vietnam. Obviously, a guy of impeccable credentials. My other Green Beret Sergeant Major friend I mentioned, the A to Z guy. So he's on the board. Yet another career Special Forces guy, a couple former ASACs from the FBI, and I think the one person who was the Deputy Chief of Station from the CIA were the original founding directors. So we were well plugged into the federal government, and and I knew all these people whom I'd met through all this other work, and they were looking for, I think, really just cheap legal help to navigate all the nonprofit 501c3 stuff and to make sure everything ran and deal with other legal issues. And I was more than happy to sign on for minimal wages. But when the Beslan school siege kicked off, Drew Dix and Andy Anderson, John Anderson, the two Special Forces guys, they said, you need to go, because everybody knew right away that there were wild, crazy stories coming out of the news media, stories that didn't make sense. And we ran it down to the FBI people. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow was not sending anyone down there. They said, this is too crazy, too unstable. So they said, you need to go because you're going to have people there, in the Spetsnaz units who are going to be there. You're probably the only one who can get there and get information that's real and bring it back. So I jumped on a plane and off I went with a friend and colleague by the name of Yuri Fredogalov, who former GRU, Spetsnaz, combat war vet, super tough guy. And he and I went, and we got there and crawled all around the school, interviewed everybody we could. Some other contacts in Russia got me interviews with some Russian government officials. Then we went back to Moscow and talked to more people. Came back home, and a lot of what I was reporting to our board of directors continued to conflict with what all the other news media was reporting. And there were still some questions I hadn't gotten answers to. So 2 months later, in November, I went back. And then the following February into March, I went back yet again and had written a report. And at the time, we had a relationship with a former FBI ASAC who had been named the number 3 person in the brand new Department of Homeland Security, who, I don't know if you remember, the first director of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge, who was the former governor of Pennsylvania. So she's under him. And we got in touch with them, and Ridge even said, he said this publicly, that the new Department of Homeland Security didn't know anything about what was going on there. Everybody wanted to know because this sort of foretold future terror attacks, especially the Islamist terror attacks. So I wrote up a report and we sent it to them. And really it was our main chief director, Drew Dix, who said, well, you know what? I know how Washington works, and this report is great, but it's going to sit on a lot of shelves in Washington. And to really get this important information out, you need to rewrite this as a book. And I said, I don't really want to write this as a book. I feel like I've done my time. And he said, no, this has to be a book. You need to go sit down and write it. And I went and sat down and wrote about 20 hours a day and produced that book.
Wow.
And that really kind of started everything.
And how many books total have you written now?
Oh my. Got to forgive me because now I have to count on my fingers. So 5, 6, 7, maybe.
Wow.
Something like
is
that.
The 1500 years, is that the newest one, correct?
It was until today.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It was until today. We just got a new one submitted to Amazon today.
Okay. Awesome.
And 1500 years came out just a few days before Christmas.
Okay.
Just last year. So
is that the
both
long path to sudden enlightenment?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That is it.
Nice.
That is it.
Cool. I'll make sure I have a link for that one too.
It was nice to actually sit down and write something positive and just not be so completely immersed in violence, terror attacks, and things like the Virginia Tech massacre.
Oh, yeah. I suppose that can take its toll. So mentally, and like I said, when the episode comes out, I'll put links to your website and all your books and hopefully get more people looking at them. And I know you sent me the 1500 years one, and that's a long book. It's like 800 pages. So I haven't read it yet. And I'll tell you what I tell almost all my guests who send me books and stuff. It's on my list. I will get to it. My only thing is I before I started this podcast, I used to read on average about a book a week, over 50 books a year easily. And once I started this show and all the extra time it takes, I've read 3 books in the last 4.5 years. So,
I can completely appreciate that.
Yeah.
I've been on enough radio shows, almost all exclusively due to Terrett Beslan, back when that was something that was still in the conscious mind of the public and the government and law enforcement around the country, including some pretty famous talk shows. Like I was on Glenn Beck's show at one point.
Oh, wow.
And, you talk to people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people like you live the same life. I always ask them the same question, off microphone. So how much time do you really have to invest in this? Because I think the average listener really doesn't appreciate what people like you do. They think you just get on the mic and you've got some knucklehead on and you're going to talk for a while, you shut it down, and then you put it up on your website, however it goes. I am a complete Luddite. I'm the most technologically incompetent person in the world. And they think, so, you work 2 hours a week, maybe, or 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week. And they have no idea the degree to which, in order to do what you do, even with your podcast, I realize you are constantly talking, vetting people, guests. I know you probably get bombarded with people. Then you get people like me, who Dan Millman, wonderful, wonderful guy, kind enough to put us in touch together. And then I think our mutual acquaintance up in Boulder, Colorado, inundating you with people and ideas, Randall. And
Randall sends me a lot of guests. I get about over 85% of my guests now through suggestions from previous guests. And there's like 2, Randall and Francis Pineda, between the 2 of them have probably sent me, and also I'd probably add Reggie Darden into that too. Reggie, he was, I don't know if you know him, but he was just on here too. But those 3 have probably, out of my 200 and almost 40 interviews I've done, I bet those 3 have sent me, between the 3 of them, probably close to 100 guests. I bet easily 75.
And out of those, you got exponentially greater numbers thrown at you.
Yep, exactly.
And you've got to read, you've got to stay on top of things. I can only imagine, I'm not a podcast guy, I can only imagine how many other podcasts you're also paying attention to, seeing what else is out there, what other people are doing, what the public interest is. It becomes an 80-hour-a-week job that you can hardly even keep up with. Yeah, I appreciate.
Unfortunately, I wish it was a full-time job. It's not. I mean, it definitely takes. I mean, my record, I think, in 1 week is 8 or 9 interviews in a week. I mean, like right now, I think I have 9 or 10 interviews completed that I haven't even started editing yet. So I have, almost 3 months of interviews to edit. I have to get at least one edited every week just so I can release that one. But my goal is to actually get ahead so I can breathe a little bit. Yeah. I figure if I do this as long as I'm hoping I can, by the time I retire, I'll have enough books to read for the rest of my life, and it'll be wonderful. I'll just be reading.
You can go lock yourself away in an apartment in a big city somewhere.
And just read. Yep, exactly. And just read nonstop. You have a library in my house full of just martial arts books, and just read. I'll love it so much. We'll see. Fingers crossed. But yeah, no, it's definitely, like I said, it's a lot of work, but it's work I enjoy doing. I love doing this show. And like I said, there are podcast hosts out there that don't do any editing at all. They release a show as is, and it's, I'm an old radio guy, so I want it. And I've had many of my guests, big name guests.
You've got the voice.
Thank you. I started in radio when I was 15, but many of my guests have told me it's the best sounding podcast they've ever been on. And that's something I take pride in. I mean, I don't over edit. I don't take out stuff that makes sense for the show, but I'm taking out pauses that are too long. I'm taking out I'm taking out some mouth clicks, some, clearing of the throat type stuff, or some, rarely is I'm taking out stuff that actually matters to the show. So that's just, like on say an interview goes an hour and 10 minutes. By the time I'm done editing, it'll maybe be like an hour or 2, hour 3. And no one will ever know that I took anything out of it, and it just sounds good and flows good. So
let me play interviewer here for a moment.
Okay.
How do you fit your music into all this? I understand you're quite an accomplished musician.
Well, I'm not a musician myself, but I host a musical podcast. I have a second podcast.
How did I get that wrong? I thought you were a musician.
Well, if you were scrolling through my episodes, I actually interviewed a musician named Brian Doucette from Canada, who's a touring musician, and he's also a martial artist. But I've been around music my whole life. So, and I actually host another podcast that has to do with a cappella music. So that's my second podcast. And that one's on about 260 episodes, I think, already. This
is so impressive and overwhelming to me. I can barely do email.
That's okay.
I have a flip phone, Brian.
Nice. You're like one of my favorite TV characters, Leroy Jethro Gibbs from NCIS with his flip phone.
I kind of remember that
from
way back.
His flip phone and his knife.
That was Mark Harmon.
Yeah, Mark Harmon. Right? Love it. It's one of my favorite shows. He's got his rule number 9. Always carry a knife. But yeah, he always had his flip phone out and hated technology. So I love it. That's good.
I'm more like Longmire. I'd like to use other people's phones.
There you go. So over your years of, martial arts, athletics, weightlifting, everything you've done, is there one philosophy that stands out for you?
Wow. That is a question that I would have loved to have had a week ago to contemplate. Is there a philosophy that stands out? Really, for me, a philosophy of life that melds everything together is everybody has a path they've got to take, and it has to be your path. Never, ever conscript yourself into the orthodoxy, doctrinaire thoughts, and I mean this in terms of life, philosophy, politics, religion. Do not totally conscript yourself into anything else to the degree you're letting someone else do your thinking for you. One of the most fundamental aspects of the ancient Slavic system of martial arts system is live your life as a king, not as a soldier.
Nice.
Soldiers get to be told what to think, how to act, what to say, what to do in everything. When you're a king in your own life. You get to decide all those things for yourself. And that is true with every adventure experience you're ever going to have in life. Follow your heart, follow your dream, be realistic, always have a plan B, and find what is your path, what makes you happiest, and never, ever, ever be afraid to jump off that path and deviate and take a different path. And, in this book, The Long Path to Sudden Enlightenment, I talk about this, that sometimes you go down the path, and I know you are well familiar with this old story, proverb, if you will, about the Japanese master has the young samurai come to him and ask the master, how many years is it going to take me to become a master at karate? And the Japanese master says 10 years. And the young samurai says, well, what if I train twice as hard as everybody else? Master says 20 years.
Yep.
And he says, what if I train even harder than that? He says 30 years. And the samurai says, well, how can it be that if I'm willing to try so hard, so much harder than anybody else, the time just gets greater? And the old master says, well, when you put yourself on the path of a long journey with one eye always on the destination, you only have one eye left with which to find your way. And I'm a big advocate of deciding what you think you want to do in life, maybe what you're destined to do. Put yourself on that path that puts you in the general direction, but don't completely attach yourself and your personal happiness to whether you actually get there, because you never know where you're going to end up. And I make the point of Bill Murray.
Okay.
Bill Murray started out as a pre-med student at Regis University, where I taught in Denver for years.
Okay.
Dropped out, went to Hollywood. Look what he did with his life.
Yeah.
You look at people like Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Stephen Jobs, the three icons of modern high tech, all of them college dropouts.
Yep.
You look at Einstein, who failed out of high school. So you never know what your life holds for you, what the future holds for you, what your destiny may hold for you. Put yourself on a general path towards something that you think you want. We all need it. You have to have a goal. You have to have a purpose. Work hard toward it, but don't ever feel like you're a failure if you find yourself deviated from that path and life puts you somewhere else doing something else.
See, I love that answer. And the thing is, if you would have had a week to think about it, you would have gave a different answer. I guarantee it. And you gave like an amazing answer. So that's why I don't tell people ahead of time.
Brian, I'd have come up with a shorter version of it.
It's okay. It's not a problem. All right. I have a few fun questions I use to wrap up the interview. You never really did the competition other than wrestling and stuff, but let's say at some point in your life, you decided you were going to go to the UFC. You were going to go into the octagon and fight MMA. What is your MMA walk-up song going to be? What song's playing as you're taking that walk into the cage?
Wow. It may be a fun question for you, but that's a hard question for me. Bonnie Tyler, I Need a Hero.
I love it. No one's ever picked that. That is awesome. That is such a great song too. Okay. I like it. All right. Who are 3, 4, 5 names you'd put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Oh, I'm sure everybody says Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, et cetera, et cetera.
You'd think that. I mean, they do get picked a lot, but there's a lot of people who don't mention them. A lot of people only mention their own instructors. A lot of people, mention I had one person list all boxing people. It's one person listed all grappling people. So it's really personal. I mean, yes, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris are probably picked the most, but not everyone picks them.
I think, again, understanding what the purpose of Mount Rushmore was and is, which takes it away from being peculiar to any one individual. I think you have to really kind of look at those icons of martial arts that everyone would recognize. So yeah, I would say, how do you not put Bruce Lee there?
Yep.
I would say Muhammad Ali.
Yes, definitely.
Whether people agreed with his politics, religion choices, and so many things, in the latter years of his life, his face was the single most recognized face of anyone in the entire world.
Oh, yeah. I honestly think the only athlete who came closer before today's age of the internet and nonstop social media, before that, the only athlete who came close and maybe equaled him was Michael Jordan as far as worldwide popularity.
That may be the case.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I would recognize Michael Jordan if I
Really? Wow. Okay.
You mentioned not being a football fan.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan I'm not a big follower. I'm not going to say I'm not a fan because I appreciate the athleticism of so many sports, but I've never been a basketball follower.
Oh, I was a huge Michael Jordan fan when I was a kid.
I know who he is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would definitely say Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
I think Chuck Norris more for his movies than his martial arts accomplishments. He could be a miscongeniality in these choices. I would personally put Oleg Taktarov in there.
Nice. The Russian Bear.
Russian Bear.
I've never met him, but I went to a seminar with his instructor.
Judo Gene LaBelle. Go-kart.
Yeah.
Chivok.
Yep. Tavakian. Yeah.
I've never met him, but I consider Oleg a dear friend.
Nice.
And I'll tell you a quick story, whether it's boring to your listeners. If it is, you can cut it out. So one time Oleg came out here, and I've stayed with he and his wife Masha at their place on the backside of the Hollywood Mountain.
Wow.
So everybody knows the front of the Hollywood Mountain with the Hollywood sign.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the peak behind it, and they lived all the way down at the base of it. And back there, that mountain is not only steep and rugged, but it is dense forest foliage with wildlife you would never imagine right there in Hollywood. So Oleg was staying at my house in the mountains here in Colorado. House is at 9,000 feet. And, the Siberian Russian bear. So I had an Akita. I've always had Japanese Akitas, my favorite dog in the world. So I had this Akita who, unlike most Akitas, was the friendliest thing that ever lived. And at a certain point, and I always kept my house cold, I think, by most people's standards.
Yep.
And I noticed my dog is like furtively skirting away from Oleg during the day. Anytime Oleg goes near him, he's running away. And I'm going, Oleg, what? And the dog's name was Cossack, of all things. So what's with you and Cossack? And Oleg's like, well, I don't know. Sometimes you keep your house so cold. I capture Cossack in the night and I stuff him under the covers with me.
That's awesome.
So there's the Russian bear.
I love it. That is cool. No, I've been a fan of his ever since his first appearance in the UFC back in the day. And
guy's phenomenal. He is peerless in his skills. And sadly, far too many people have forgotten him and all he accomplished and what he did for Russians in mainstream global martial arts and MMA. Yep. They really have.
A huge fan. And every time he pops up in a movie, I'm like, that's Oleg Taktarov. So my friends are like, who? Yep. And then I got to tell them the whole story. So no, that's good.
Yeah, now you have another story.
There we go. All right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Zen in the Martial Arts by Joe Hyams.
Nice. That's my pick too. That's the one I always say. I love it. Just had a conversation yesterday with someone about that book. I like it. It's definitely a favorite. I recommend it to most people I meet. So that's good.
I continue to do so as well.
Nice. Now this one you may not have an answer for. Maybe you do, because you said you have your wife and your son possibly. But do you have a favorite martial arts video game?
Brian, I have not played a video game since Pong came out in 1972 or so.
72, 73, I think.
I'm trying to think of when my father got it on our television.
Wow.
And I played it about 3 times, and that was the first and last video game I ever played.
Wow.
So no, I don't have a favorite.
A guest I had about a little over 2 years ago, had the argument that Pong was actually a martial arts game, so that counted. So we'll count that one, because he said you're fighting back and forth with a weapon like a stick and hitting a ball back and forth. I'm like, okay,
combat tennis on the
exactly.
TV.
So we'll count it. All right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Oh, that's such an easy one for me. And again, it dates me. Mm-hmm. The original Kung Fu TV series with David Carradine in the 70s.
Nice. And supposedly the rumor is they're making a movie version with Donnie Yen, is what I've heard.
Interestingly,
I hope it's true.
I have not heard this, but Donnie Yen, I talked about my Kung Fu Sifu, Nick Grayson.
Mm-hmm.
Nick kind of grew up with Donnie Yen.
Wow.
Because Nick and Donnie's Kung Fu master was Master Bao Sim Mak, who was Donnie Yen's mother.
Oh, wow.
She was the only recognized top-level Kung Fu master to come out of China back then.
That's cool. That's another great story. I like it.
So that would be phenomenal if Donnie Yen does such a show. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but in the Kung Fu ran from 73 to
3 years, 4 years?
76 or 74 to 77 before David Carradine walked off. And then spent the rest of his life trying to resurrect, having a career playing the same role.
Exactly.
But I think it was around 1990, they did sort of a sequel series starring David Carradine. Okay.
Yep.
So you know it.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
His son was played by Chris Potter.
Chris Potter, who went on to play the pain in the butt father of the girls in the Canadian-made movie Heartland,
Oh, wow. I did not know
about
that.
a
Okay.
successive generational ranch family.
Hmm.
Think of it as like a G-rated version of Yellowstone. Think of it as a G-rated version of that.
Okay.
And Chris Potter plays a really antagonistic role in that show, but that's the first thing I've seen him in since
Yeah.
Kung Fu the Legend Continues. Yeah.
One of my first year guests, Sean Kanan, who played Karate's bad boy Mike Barnes in the Karate Kid 3 and Cobra Kai series.
Remember it well.
He was up for that role in Kung Fu the Legend Continues, and Chris Potter got it. He talked about that when I interviewed him. So, yeah. But I'm one of the few who actually liked The Legend Continues better than the original.
I like The Legend Continues a lot.
Yeah.
You're a much younger guy than I. So about the time, well, I'm thinking about the time the original Kung Fu show was on, you were just born?
I was born in 74. So, yep. I saw it in
Okay,
reruns
yeah.
when I was little.
You know, like all movies, TV shows, they're time periods, they're time pieces
Yeah.
for that exact moment. And like watching All in the Family today, it just doesn't translate the way
Yeah.
it did back then.
Yep.
For where society was, where the culture was, where the mentality of people was, and Kung Fu was brilliant
Yeah.
for that time, that moment, and what the culture was then. So I can easily see where you would think that Kung Fu the Legend Continues was better. I think Kung Fu the Legend Continues is incredible.
Yeah.
I think they had in the ensuing years an opportunity to really delve into and more fully develop so many things that just got touched on in that first show. Like Star Trek ran for 3 years that I grew up with.
Mhm.
Same thing. And then look at how many successive TV series and movies they've done, further developing what were the brilliant notions of a genius in Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah, definitely. I've had that conversation many times too about the whole Star Wars or Star Trek thing, and same thing. Same thing with Star Wars too. I mean, yes, there was 3 movies, early 80s, nothing for 20 years, and then boom, suddenly it's been back nonstop for the last 20 years. So
yeah, but everybody's been thinking about it all that time.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, cool. All right, how about a favorite martial arts movie?
Well, can I give you what might be considered a serious one and a comedic one?
Absolutely.
All right. One of my favorite, certainly, martial arts movies, sort of a serious one, Best of the Best.
Oh, love it. Yes, absolutely. Simon Rhee was on the show, so I love Best of the Best.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, what an honor.
Oh, yeah, extremely. Yeah, he was so fun and so cool to talk to, and I love that show.
My comedic one is The Last Dragon.
I've been trying to get Timac on my show for 4.5 years. I'm really hoping I can someday. He'd be so fun to talk to. I love. It's another one. I just love that movie. That one
Great
and
film.
Big Trouble in Little China are 2 of my guilty pleasures. I just have to watch all the time. It's some great answers, man. Let's see. Movie wise, I think me and you would get along a lot. So.
You could come visit. I live in a tiny little town in the mountains. There's no big city nearby. There's no luxuries, but I have got shelves and shelves of DVDs.
Nice. I like it.
And then, of course, there's always Netflix.
Yes. So I got to ask, just from your TV show, now, have you watched the new series Warrior yet?
Twice.
Me too. Me too.
I'm a horrible insomniac. I tend to get 2-3 hours of sleep. I'll wake up at 1 a.m, and if I'm not writing, I'm reading news from around the world. And when I get tired of all that, I can binge watch TV and watch movies like nobody's business. Drives my wife crazy.
I love it. All right, final question. This one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've seen in your whole life, favorite movie fight scene?
Ooh, here's another question I wish I'd had a week ago, because wow, I'd have gone through so many of them. I'd have had so many DVDs in the player, checking fight scenes out. Favorite fight
Anything goes. We've had people pick, the Rocky movies, obviously Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris in the Coliseum, Star Wars, Princess Bride, They Live. I mean, you name it, it's been picked.
I would say open range, reality-based Western movie with Kevin Costner.
I don't think I've seen it, so I'm not familiar with the fight scene. Who does he fight in that one? Do you remember?
It is your typical Western plot storyline, except that he and Robert Duvall, who's his boss, they're driving a herd of cattle across the West. I think they're in Wyoming or Colorado or somewhere. And they're what was known then as free grazers,
Okay.
where the big ranch owners, and this goes back to the range wars like in Wyoming where they ended up hanging people. The big ranch owners would claim all this area that was really federal public land for their own. And they would kill people who would bring their cattle in and graze off what they thought of as their range. So Robert Duvall, it's right after the Civil War. Kevin Costner is, I think, a Confederate war veteran who was part of like Quantrill's Raiders. Definitely a trained, experienced killer who's just trying to get past all that. So they drive their cattle through this town, and this big rancher hates it and starts attacking them. And ultimately, Kevin Costner and Robert Duvall go into the town to face down this big rancher and his army of gun-toting cutthroats. And it's a great fight scene.
Very cool. Now I'm kind of curious. Might have to find that one this weekend and watch it, because I'm a huge Kevin Costner fan, and I don't think I've seen that movie.
You'll watch it more than once, I promise.
Nice. I love it. Cool. Well, John, before I let you go, is there anything I forgot to ask you, or we just want to be sure we mention really quick before we release this and stop? But I mentioned before, September 4th, your episode will come out, and I'll put links for anything you want me to on there. But anything last minute you want to mention?
You know, Brian, I really appreciate the time. It's an honor to be on your show, especially knowing some of the really, really, truly notable people who you've had on and incredible martial arts shoulders that you rub with. I think your listeners have probably heard more than enough about me, and I will look forward to listening if I can. I think, like a lot of people who are not professionals, I have very little tolerance for hearing my own voice. But if I can, I'll look forward to listening to the show, and I will share it with a lot of people and tell them that they need to start becoming regular subscribers.
Seriously, man, this has been so much fun. Amazing storyteller. And I can't wait to retire so I can finally read your book. but seriously, this has been a blast, and I think the listeners are really going to enjoy it.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Blessings to you.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.